Blue Jacket, War Chief of the Shawnees by Allan W. Eckert. Chapter 1, Wednesday morning, June 5th, 1771. Listen, Marmee, you dunderhead, Vance said irritably. It's about time you quit playing like as if you were a stupid Injun. There just ain't no good reason for you all the time running off into the woods and hunting with that crazy bow and arrow. What for you think Pa gave you that gun? Vance Van Swearingen paused to give his younger brother a chance to reply, but when the boy merely stared at him and tightened his lips, he shook his head. Sometimes nowadays, he said, I get to thinking maybe Tom's right, and you are sort of funny in the head. Ain't normal for nobody to like Injuns the way you do and try to act like 'em all the time. About time you start acting like a white boy here. The boy he had called Marmee still said nothing and merely continued lacing a high moccasin around his calf. Vance snorted. Dang, Injun lover, you like savages so much, why don't you just go on and live with them instead of hanging around here? Ain't none of us want to have no dang Injun lover in the family. Reckon you need to be straightened out some. Vance turned on his heel and strode from the room, banging the door loudly after him. For a long while the younger boy remained motionless, lost in thought. He hadn't trusted himself to answer when Vance was talking because it would have ended up in another fight. Now that he could take Vance, not that he couldn't take Vance if it came to that. Vance might be 6 years older, but he wasn't fast enough anymore, or strong enough, or even big enough. But if they had fought, his other brothers would have come running, and long ago he had learned he couldn't fight them all at once. The boy grunted in anger and frustration. He began to wind the long rawhide laces of his moccasin boot around the other leg. Why, he wondered, couldn't his family understand how he felt? After all, whether they liked it or not, Indians were people, not animals. The cabin door banged open again, and his younger brother, 12-year-old Charlie, clattered in. His sand-colored hair was mussed, and his eyes were flashing with excitement. Woo-wee! You sure got Vance all stirred up, Duke. He's out there telling the others that you're aiming to go out and act like a savage again, telling them they ought to get in here and teach you another lesson. His eyes widened, and he added hastily, I think they really aim to do it, too, Duke. Better light out in a hurry, for you're in for it. At this time, Pa ain't home to bust it up. The older boy nodded. It wouldn't be the first time he had been ganged up by his elder brothers, John, Tom, Steele, Vance, and Joe. Moving quickly, he finished lacing his moccasin, and then from the table scooped up his narrow-bladed skinning knife in its bark sheathed and shoved it into the waistband of his coarsely woven trousers. It was not the first time his younger brother had warned him in time, and he was grateful to Charlie. Grateful, too, that Charlie continued to call him Duke, rather than that detestable nickname of Marmee, which all the rest of them used. His name was Marmaduke Van Swearingen, and he was 17 years old. Tall for his age, he was well-built, and his hair very dark and his features well-formed. And much to the disgust of nearly everyone who knew him, he had an abiding admiration for Indians. It didn't matter what tribe they belonged to, either. Duke simply felt that the Indians had been very badly treated by the whites in almost every encounter, and that their way of life was better by far than the white man's ways. The fact that outlying settlements and isolated cabins nearby had been attacked on occasion and their occupants killed by marauding Indians made little difference to him. After all, the whites had stolen their lands, hadn't they? And how many Indians had been killed by the whites without just cause? As far as Duke was concerned, the Indians had good reason for their raids. Now, from a peg near the door, he took down a light blue hunting shirt woven of flax and wool, the material commonly called linsey-woolsey, and put it on over his bare and well-tanned chest. It really looked more like a vest now than the carefully constructed long-sleeved garment his mother had made for him. The collar was gone. He had ripped off both sleeves to the shoulder, and only one button remained to hold it all together. He strode over to his low bed, hardly more than a pallet on the floor, and took down from the wall a highly polished bow and raccoon-skinned quiver. The 8 or 9 arrows in the quiver were fletched with turkey feathers and tipped with sharpened pieces of bone. Alongside where the bow had hung was an old but serviceable musket, a birthday present his father had given him last March. Duke suspected it was just one more effort by his parents to rid him of the strong admiration he felt for the red man and his ways. Ever since he was 9, he had wanted to be like them. When he heard of encounters between white men and Indians, he always, with a perverse loyalty, felt a lift of his spirits if it had been the whites who were bested. More than once he had announced wistfully that when he had become a man, he would take up wonderfully for the free life of the Indians and live his days out happily with some tribe. At first his parents, brothers, and sister had just nodded and grinned, considering it a passing fancy, but it hadn't passed, and now it was an issue which continued to irk the entire family. They felt Duke was the laughingstock of all their neighbors, and that it was shameful of him to embarrass them in such a manner. Their father had echoed the sentiments of the family when he said, Marmee, don't talk so foolish. Indians ain't to be fooled with, and they ain't to be admired nohow. And far as you joining up with them, I reckon you ever did see one a-coming at you, you'd hightail at home like they was a devil licking at your heels. The family's disbelief and attempts at discouragement had not dampened his conviction, but he talked about it less as time passed. Nevertheless, he still took constant jibes from them because he preferred the bow for hunting over the musket and because he liked to dress himself Indian fashion. Charlie was peeking through a crack in the door as Duke finished his preparations, but now he whirled around and whispered urgently, "They're coming, Duke, all 5 of them." Duke nodded. "I'll skin out the back window," he said. "See you later, Charlie." As he began to open the small window, Charlie ran out to his side. "Help me up, Duke, I'm going with you." He continued hastily when Duke started to shake his head. "Don't tell me no. I warned you, didn't I? And you know I don't care if you like Injuns. I just want to go hunting with you, Duke, please." "Paul'll tan your hide before we get home," Duke warned. "I've been tanned before. Once more won't kill me." There wasn't time to argue. Duke could hear them coming now, and so without another word, he wrapped his arms around his little brother's middle and shoved the boy's legs first, then lowered him to the ground. Next he handed out his bow and quiver. "Marmy!" his elder brother John was calling. "Marmy, get out here and face what you got coming. We ain't gonna stand for no Injun lover as a brother. Come on right now." Duke grinned and hoisted himself out of the window head first, doing a smooth somersault as he touched the ground and immediately regained his feet. In front, John was calling him again. "Listen, Marmy, we don't want to mess up the house, but either come out by the time I count 10, or we're going to come in and drag you out. Here?" Snatching up his weapons in one hand and grabbing Charlie's small hand with the other, Duke ran towards the woods 50 yards away. Once there, he'd be safe. He knew all about cover, hiding, and backtracking than the whole lot of them put together. But the trick was to get to that cover unseen. With Charlie along, he wouldn't be able to travel as rapidly or as quietly. The brothers would not be apt to pursue unless they glimpsed them running. Even as they ran, the voice of John came to them faintly. 6, 7, 8. The pair plugged into the screen of the woodland, and the cabin was almost immediately lost from sight and hearing. They did not hear John finish his count or see the 5 boys rush to the cabin door. Nor did they see the exasperation of the 5 when they discovered that there was no one inside. They could imagine their reaction, however, and both of them laughed aloud as they followed a ravine towards a distant creek where Duke had often gone hunting.